Ms. Mace.
Madam Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Representative Mace, you are now recognized. The clerk will report your amendment.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee print offered by Ms. Mace of South Carolina.
Madam Chairwoman,
Yes.
I reserve a point of order.
Okay, he reserves a point of order. The clerk, without objection, have you read the amendment? Yes. Okay, without objection, the reading of the amendment is dispensed with. The gentle lady is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. This amendment is fairly simple. In the budget that we're reviewing this morning during markup, there's some vague and nebulous language covering about $25 million in spending allocated to the Government Accountability Office to pursue oversight of implementation of some pretty vague progressive programs. So instead, this amendment would give it to the Department of Defense Inspector General to assist in the tracking of military equipment seized by the Taliban recently in Afghanistan. And this conversation about Afghanistan is not a distraction. This problem is real, and we have an opportunity today to address some of the issues that folks on both sides of the aisle, Republican and Democrat, are very concerned about. We have veterans in our chamber, both Republicans and Democrats, who served during the war, served over the last 20 years in this war, and served in Afghanistan. And this amendment would task the Department of Defense IG with oversight, for example, of stolen fuel that has been supplied to Afghanistan from the United States. As a direct result of the administration's execution of this exit strategy that was, I think, very hastily done, many of us would agree, the Taliban is now armed with significant resources, equipment, arms, artillery, helicopters, drones, weapons, and munitions from the United States now. You name it, they have it. We even gave the Taliban an air force in recent weeks. Worse, it would appear that we really don't, as a nation, have any idea what was left behind, what its value is, how much equipment, how many weapons platforms, what we left behind are now in the custody of the Taliban. And I know that many of us read reports yesterday that now Iran is allegedly buying equipment, particularly vehicles, from the Taliban. This is enormously problematic for the United States on a global scale, and does impact our national security. One U.S. official recently admitted that everything that hasn't been destroyed is now in the Taliban's. According to a 2017 assessment between 2003 and 2016, the U.S. military has transferred approximately 75,000 military vehicles, 600,000 weapon systems, 208 aircraft, to the Afghan National Defense Forces. On August 17th of this year, President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said that we don't have a complete picture, obviously, of where every article of defense materials has gone, but certainly a fair amount of it has fallen into the hands of the Taliban. And obviously, we don't have a sense that they're going to readily hand it over to us at the airport. Recent reporting suggests the Taliban now have access to countless M4 and M16 rifles, M24 sniper rifles, and M250 caliber machine guns, about 2,000 armored vehicles, including Humvees, about 40 aircraft, including the UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters, Scout attack helicopters, and Scan Eagle military drones. Many of us have seen the footage on Twitter of them flying these aircraft. Countless pieces of communications equipment and night vision goggles, for example. It's been reported that the Taliban has seized biometric devices that could also aid in their attempts to identify and eventually persecute Afghans that assisted in the U.S. mission, those that we left behind who are willing to take a bullet for our country and for our soldiers who served over there. Further, the Cigar SOPCO confirmed that more than 50% of all fuel directed to the Afghan government has now been stolen. It's vital that the Department of Defense IG ascertain the magnitude of these lost arms and supplies. This will facilitate any hope we may have of at least partially recouping these losses, or at least tracking these losses, having some knowledge of what we lost overseas in Afghanistan, as well as determining the magnitude of the security risk these losses now represent. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. The time is now to start addressing, now that we're out of Afghanistan, start figuring out and tracking what we left behind. And I urge and ask for your support. I yield back.
Thank you for your thoughtful amendment. Mr. Comer, you are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I support this amendment. The Taliban are now the most well-armed insurgency in the world, thanks to the botched withdrawal of the Biden administration. The Pentagon has refused to answer simple questions about how many U.S. weapons are now in the hands of the Taliban. The American people deserve to know what equipment our country has turned over to the Taliban. We should make every effort to recover those losses. So I urge my colleagues to vote yes on the Mace amendment. I yield back.
Does anyone else seek recognition? I now recognize myself for 5 minutes, and I want to thank the gentlelady for offering her amendment. She expressed the concerns that we all share. As I mentioned earlier, we will continue to conduct oversight of the administration's response to the situation in Afghanistan, working closely with our colleagues on the House Armed Services, Foreign Affairs, and Intelligence committees so that we can be as effective as possible. I appreciate the gentlelady's goal of funding the Department of Defense, IG, to conduct additional oversight. Unfortunately, this is outside our committee's jurisdiction and therefore is not germane to this bill. I want to remind the gentlelady and my colleagues that our committee is seeking a classified briefing on just this issue with the administration to discuss the question of U.S. military equipment and fuel provided to the Afghan military. It's my understanding we'll have a classified briefing on it the week we return, the third week in September. Given the jurisdictional concerns, we cannot take up this amendment. I yield back. Who else seeks recognition?
Madam Chairwoman, I have an amendment at the desk, LaTurner 1.
Okay,
Oh, no, we have to dispose of the,
we have to,
dispose of the Mason amendment.
okay, we have to dispose of the Mason amendment first. The question is now,
Madam Chairwoman, I asked for the ruling by the chair on on the germaneness of the pending amendment. I had previously reserved a point of order.
okay, all right.
Madam Chair, am I able to appeal the ruling here that it's not germane?
Okay, the gentleman has made a,
Madam Chair, I had raised my hand to speak on the amendment prior to Mr. Clyburn wanting to, or excuse me, Mr. Connolly wanting to obtain the ruling on the chair. I just, I was on mute. I just raised my hand in the chat thing on Zoom, you know, so when you asked.
No, you're ruling.
okay,
Madam
So you have to rule.
okay,
Chairwoman, I have no desire to prevent Mr. Biggs from speaking. I didn't see his hand. I was simply asking the chair to
Okay.
clarify the ruling.
the gentleman yields to your request, Mr. Biggs. You are now recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say I moved to strike the last word. So
He's right.
You're now recognized.
thank you. And I rise in support of the Mace amendment. I think it is an appropriate amendment. She iterated some of the concerns that we have, but over the course of our time in the Steiger was very clear. Over the course of our 20 years there, we spent over $83 billion in materiel. And from April 30th to June 30th of this year alone, we spent $212 million to buy 174 new Humvees, ostensibly for the Afghan security forces, and they're gone. I mean, that's one of the questions I asked him. And I said, well, where'd they go? And he said, well, we need to have a classified setting. And so I appreciate the fact that you're going to go into, you want to get a classified briefing. I'm 100% supportive of that, Madam Chair. But I mean, we're talking literally, and one of the things he said is that half of the planes have left the country of Afghanistan. And they're all over. There was a report yesterday that Iran has many of our vehicles already in Iran. Madam Chair, I think I'm going to argue for the germaneness of this because we are talking about of a rather broad source that the Oversight Committee has And so I believe this is germane. I support the Mace Amendment and I yield back.
Who else seeks recognition? Anyone else seek recognition?
Madam Chair, Congresswoman Mace, I'd like to appeal the ruling. I mean, IGs are part of our jurisdiction.
Okay, we haven't ruled yet. The gentleman from Virginia makes a point of order that I'm prepared to rule on the point of order. The gentleman from Virginia makes a point of order that the amendment proposed by the member is not germane. Clause 7 of Rule 16, the germaneness rule, provides that no proposition on a subject different from that under consideration shall be admitted under color of amendment. Here, as I mentioned earlier, the amendment falls outside our committee's jurisdiction. Because we have jurisdiction over IGs, this amendment is not germane to this particular bill. Therefore, the amendment offered by the lady fails this basic test of germaneness, and the point of order is sustained. Who else seeks recognition?
I'd like to appeal the ruling.
Mr.
I move the
Cloud?
table. Hank Johnson moves the table.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'd like to have I mean, is it possible to have a vote on tabling? Or
Okay,
I mean, I
the
want to appeal
motion-
the ruling.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. The motion to table is not debatable. The question is, shall the committee table the gentleman's appeal? All those in favor say aye.
Madam Chair, can we have a recorded
Aye.
All
vote?
those,
Aye.
Aye.
Madam
all
Chair,
those
can we have a
opposed say
recorded vote?
No,
In the opinion of
No.
no.
No, Madam Chair, can we have a recorded vote on the tabling?
Okay,
Recorded vote.
we have to finish the voice vote before you can appeal the vote. We have to vote. So right now, we have the aye vote. All those opposed say no.
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 Okay, in
No.
the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion to table is agreed to. The
As for the yeas
gentleman's
and nays.
motion is not in order.
Madam Chair, I'd like a recorded vote.
Okay, the
IGs are
clerk,
in the jurisdiction of our committee.
the clerk will call the roll. Okay, give me what's next.
Ms. Norton,
Ms. Norton votes aye.
Ms. Norton votes aye. Mr. Lynch,
Mr. Lynch votes aye.
Mr. Lynch votes aye.
And to explain, hopefully, with
Mr.
some
Cooper?
common sense, why I
Cooper
support this
votes aye.
amendment. First off, we're already behind the eight ball.
Mr.
Under
Cooper
current
votes aye.
regulation,
Mr. Connolly,
Mr. Connolly votes aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy,
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Raskin,
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Mr. Khanna,
Aye.
Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Mfume,
Mr. Mfume votes aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, Ms. Tlaib,
Tlaib votes aye.
Ms. Tlaib votes aye. Ms. Porter,
Aye.
Ms. Porter votes, Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush,
Bush votes aye.
Ms. Bush votes aye. Mr. Davis,
Davis votes aye.
Mr. Davis votes aye. Ms. Wasserman Schultz,
Wasserman Schultz votes aye.
Ms. Wasserman Schultz votes aye. Mr. Welch,
Mr. Welch votes aye.
Mr. Welch votes aye. Mr. Johnson,
Johnson votes aye.
Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Sarbanes,
Sarbanes votes aye.
Mr. Sarbanes votes aye. Ms. Spear, Ms. Kelly?
Kelly votes aye.
Ms. Kelly votes aye. Ms. Lawrence?
Lawrence votes aye.
Ms. Lawrence votes aye. Mr. DeSaulnier?
DeSaulnier votes aye.
Mr. DeSaulnier votes aye. Mr. Gomez?
Gomez votes aye.
Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Presley? Mr. Quigley?
Aye.
Mr. Quigley votes aye. Mr. Comer?
No.
Mr. Comer votes no. Mr. Jordan? Mr. Gosar?
No.
Mr. Gosar votes no. Ms. Fox?
No.
Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Heiss?
No.
Mr. Heiss votes no. Mr. Grothman?
No.
Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud?
No.
Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Gibbs?
No.
Mr. Gibbs votes no. Mr. Higgins?
Higgins is a no.
Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Norman? Mr. Sessions?
Sessions, no.
Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Keller? Mr. Biggs?
No.
Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. Clyde?
No.
Mr. Clyde votes no. Ms. Mace?
Mace, no.
Ms. Mace votes no. Mr. Franklin?
No.
Mr. Franklin votes no. Mr. Laturner?
No.
Mr. Laturner votes no. Mr. Fallon?
No.
Mr. Fallon votes no. Ms. Harrell?
Ms. Harrell votes no.
Ms. Harrell votes no. Mr. Donalds?
No.
Mr. Donalds votes no. Ms. Maloney?
Madam Chair, how am I recorded?
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, you are not recorded.
I'd like to vote aye.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye.
Excuse me, how am I recorded? This is Representative Presley.
Ms. Presley, you are not recorded.
Presley votes aye.
Ms. Presley votes aye. Ms. Maloney?
Ms. Maloney votes aye.
Ms. Maloney votes aye.
Has every member voted? Does anyone wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will report.
On this vote, we have 24 ayes and 17 noes.
Motion to table is agreed to. Mr. Laterne,